How do you feel? Like, what are you feeling in terms of sensation, visceral, tangible experiences, flavorful moments as you rest in that infinitude, that limitlessness, that officially, from an external perspective, might be termed as madness or insanity?
I feel, I could say on the very sensational level, I feel a vibration in, I could say all cells, but let's say many, many cells all over in my body at the same time. And the space here has no need for being defined as a space. It's like, this is not a center. So to some extent, it's a very decentralized kind of consciousness that is not in need for having a location. I think this puts it into words. It's like it's almost like a free fall by accident into whatever angle of the universe. And I feel very like resting in this free fall. I think that's I mean, not very good because it's language, but there is a resting in being a free fall into whatever direction, and the directionlessness of the direction and the motionlessness of the tempo and the speed is at least an aspect of the madness. It could also be referred to as it's a scream that has no sound.
Okay. So if we imagine that there would be someone else having this similar universal phenomenal experience in one way or another, we're all unique, but there would be a universality. What you're describing is quite archetypal. It would be classically documented. We would be able to recognize what you're saying in terms of signs, indicators, symptoms, etc., and correlate them over thousands of years with other explorers such as yourself. If in today's modern culture, someone were to stumble, maybe without preparation, without this purification I was talking about earlier of the sense organs of perception and action and mind, then what elements do you think within that experience would catapult them, would propel them, would possibly catalyze a fear or an inability to rest, a scrambling to have a direction, to have some fixed sense of time and place? Tell me a little bit. I know we're imagining and we're projecting out of your own experience, but just for the sake of fleshing out other possibilities, what do you think would be the elements that could trigger the sense of losing one's mind, losing control, fear, great fear, and possibly panic attack within these spaces?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm so grateful for talking with you as an expert about that, is really this: can the nervous system handle that in the physiological terms? So I like Ayurveda. I really only got into Ayurveda due to you, and before that it was just a word for me. And the precision and the obsession of studying really what does the nervous system need in order to handle the forces of reality is amazing. I mean, yeah, okay. I don't go into detail. It's not possible. It's just an encyclopedia of revelation that's coming from there. So I think this kind of science is done and we know it. And this being applied to our nervous system, I think is just such an act of self-love in those times. But then what also comes to my mind are two things, or maybe one thing, which is in trauma therapy, people say psychoeducation in the very first session. In the very first session, you tell the student, this is how it feels when you are down regulating in your nervous system. This is how an activation feels. Do you recognize the poles? So the very first thing is, can you orient around what's happening inside of you? And so providing education, psychoeducation, providing information, this is what you will feel. And this is something that I start talking about more and more. If you want to exit functioning, you will experience fear and chaos, period. So the homework is create chaos and create fear, just because you have to create those moments. Otherwise, it's kind of still stuck in, I want to function, and at the same time, I want to break free. So it is a lot about be prepared for what might come your way in terms of, am I that powerful? No, you are even more powerful, but that's a foreplay. So just digest, and then like, who am I? The first month or maybe years, to be honest, I was like, who am I being special? And the sane question would be, how can anybody run around and think he or she isn't special? But this moment of who am I being that special? What is my life being that big? What is your life not being that limitlessly big and wonderful and blissful? So if this happens from reality, from inside, it triggers fears that you are not prepared for. You are prepared for fears and panic attacks in this world because the outer world is too much. You are not prepared for the panic attacks and fears that come from the inner world is too much. The inner world is overflowing the rest of the universe with clarity and bliss and ecstasy. It's like, this is something like, you are just not prepared for that. And I think the amount of trigger and or the totally unexpected direction where it comes from, this is something that we could handle better in a culture around those breakthroughs by better information in the first place. And then the next thing that would have helped me a lot, I'm close to self-pity. It would help me a lot if it would be any easier, but is more knowledge about reach out. It's not about words. It doesn't work in words, and still share. This is not something that you have to stay private with in terms of just repeating a trauma pattern. So I think many, many, many people are suffering so much more than would be needed from their spiritual inevitable evolution that's just happening inside, because they are suffering from extremes taking over their life. And at the same time, they have to pretend normal in the relative world. So I think this is something where all of us could do better by inviting, where are you insane? Share about where you are mad, and with how much horror and shame and guilt and self-hatred and grandiosity that this fills you. And let's contain the mad islands with so much more eagerness and appreciation and courage than how we are embracing nowadays our suit and our career. This is what we could do way better. And of course, I mean, one person dying and people gathering around and listening and being there and breathing, one woman being in labor, and all of us staying with the power of this once in a lifetime happening. All of that would, in our instincts, wash away the avoidance from those extremes on another path, and it would provide so much more safety for anybody who goes into then psychosis, etc., just because there is no other framework than something that is a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of suffering.
And why would you say that that framework is no longer readily available? It's no longer a memory. It's not a cosmology anymore. There's no map to understanding and navigating these inner worlds of experience.
I think to some extent that is the question: how did suffering enter the human world, or the human world of real illusion? Or illusion?
I feel that it's to do with the relationship to suffering. It's what happened to our relationship, to our pain, our fear, our suffering, our doubt, our trauma, that led to this new search for a framework, as if it is no longer there. And if it's no longer there, what happened to it? How has the modern westernized culture become divorced or separated from this inner map or framework that would allow someone to have an ongoing relationship to suffering, to pain, to fear, to risk, in such a way that there would be more allowance, more freedom to explore to the ends of that spectrum without feeling rushed or hemmed in, and without fear, and it's a real fear, of being judged, misjudged, misrepresented, and persecuted.
Yeah.
For what it looks like, for what their inner expressions, as they give voice to them, translates into in the external world. I'm very curious as to this, and you know, everything that you've said is playing into my thought process right now. Everything you said, and what I remember is you talking about the wounding, the wounding in the world when it comes to authority and abuse of authority, abuse of the power differential. And you talked about how it is not so typical for two women speaking together like this, that there would be that abuse of power. Is not so typical. So that's in my mind. And then I'm also remembering you talking about risk, the layers of longing that would lead you to risk. So we've been talking about risk. We've been talking about the insanity, the madness. We've been talking, and I agree, we've both been saying this, is that there needs to be information. There needs to be, in my mind, disclaimers as well, and warnings or notes of caution. There needs to be preparation. There needs to be, as you were saying, preparation, especially related to the nervous system. And then I come to that question, because you also said there's a lack of framework. There's a need for framework. So what happened to that framework? And in relation to the connection, the relationship to suffering in the modern world, what is it about the relationship that people have to their fear, their pain, their suffering today?
I mean, I could boil it down to the basic trauma of Western culture, but I think it all comes down, or is described in more practical terms, as there is a distance to my experience, and that creates all those aspects of my experience that I then refer to as negative, like the negative shimmering or frequency of my very given moment is created by me. It is created by me being separate from my experience. And that is also what I refer to when I said I suffer almost the more I suffer, because if I stay at the core of the experience, it's all about surrender. It's all about another way of deletion. It's all about like everyday business. It's like there is nothing really new happening. It's just a very cellular impact or moment of immersion into a universal happening. So there is a sense of distance that we don't know how to stop that. And at the same time, and that's, I think, the collective Western psyche on one level, and I think not on a very deep level, but on one level, it is that we think we get away with it. We think we can afford it. There is a sense, there is an expectation of, I can organize a way that doesn't overwhelm me by being clever. And I think being clever, at least in my case, was the most stupid idea that I brought up in my journey, wanting to be clever, wanting to outsmart spirituality. It's like, that doesn't work. And this is, I think, something that's embedded in especially privileged Western cultures, that we can organize a better way, because people on another continent will die first from climate change. It's not my water. My children won't be the first ones dying from thirst or hunger. So there is always this externalization of the suffering inside. And that, I think, comes with, of course, with money and privileges. And it comes with the amount of information. I mean, the two of us have a computer. Most people do not possess a computer, and they have other problems than, I want another computer in my life. So we have access to information about the outer world, and that makes it way more likely that this is the address or the place where the suffering aspects are taking place. And if I'm only myself, I'm very aware of the fact that everything is happening inside. So I think these two things are factors that
yes.
And then a lack of education, of course. I mean, the whole scene of selling you enlightenment if you give me a lot of money, all of that, of course, feeds into this story. But I think that the lack of preparation for, are you ready for being shocked by yourself? How do we prepare for a shock? Because it will come and it has to come. This is not me talking about a shock in order to make it prevent from happening. So again, it's information. It's using language for the unfiltered instead of the filtered, for the unmanipulated instead of the manipulated. I think it's our choice to where do we position words and information and channels for information onto which path that gives us a tool set for creating other frameworks